Welcome, I'm John Glanvill, and this is the Calmness in Mind process where we explore common sense solutions for your calmer life. Now, in this video, I want to share my thoughts on developing PCAs, positive conscious attitudes, and I'm going to explain what they are, how to use them wisely, how to embrace more positive mindsets whilst resisting and ignoring old, fearful, self-sabotaging thought patterns and emotions that try to shoot down optimism and positivity. And let me remind you that my process involves breaking down complex problems into simpler metaphorical models which allow you to make decisions faster and allow you to courageously embrace the subsequent discomfort of change as you reorientate yourself towards a life with more calmness, purpose and meaning. And while these models may not be entirely true, they're true enough to enable you to take action in the now and to get on with life without getting bogged down in doubt, analysis, procrastination or worry. So for clarity, let's just establish a few terms. When I refer to the unconscious brain, I mean the fast, instinctive and sort of automatic part of your brain. This includes your thoughts, your habits, unrequested worries, judgments, victim narratives, fearful catastrophizing, intrusive thoughts, and any ideas or images that spontaneously appear in your head, seemingly outside of your control. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman, he describes this as system one thinking. It's fast, it's automatic, it's intuitive, and it sort of just operates unconsciously, it just happens to you. And this system, it allows for your brain to make quick decisions and to get your body ready to react promptly to tasks and the environment and everything that's happening around you. And while it's efficient and while it's impressive, its speed can lead to errors that make it susceptible to manipulation, which is why placebo and hypnosis work, and why governments, corporations spend millions and millions of dollars on marketing every year to program your unconscious mind to accept their messages and then to act upon them. And we can use other labels for the unconscious too, like your ego, your inner child. We might call it your subconscious. We might call it your belief system, your animal, your little 8-year-old, and all the good stuff we've been talking about in the last 50 videos. It's a creative, energetic sea of imaginations, thoughts, ideas, routines, dreams, and sort of virtual reality stories. And to simplify things, I'm just going to group all those things together and just refer to them as your unconscious brain. Now, psychologists are increasingly using the term automatic mind. However, I prefer not to use the word mind, as I consciously choose to believe that it's not an actual entity. As I've said before, I see it as the screen of the mind screen, okay, on which your thoughts, be they unconscious or conscious, are projected onto, which you observe and you can choose to interact with or not. And on the other hand, we have our conscious brain, which Kahneman calls system 2 thinking, which is slow and it's deliberate and it's analytical. It requires conscious effort and it involves more complex problem solving. It involves decision making and various other aspects of thinking where you feel that you can engage and have some sort of providence over. And when faced with challenging tasks that require reasoning or critical thinking, this system 2 thinking takes over, allowing us to evaluate our options and to consider the consequences of what we may or may not do more carefully. And those two systems are of the brain. Yeah? The unconscious just throws stuff at our mind screen quickly and repetitively, and the conscious allows us to consider and analyze the information or our options or our chosen responses, but they're both of the brain. And as I've been saying right through since video number 1, you are the observer. You are the observer awareness aspect of yourself that can choose to engage with the unconscious or the conscious brain's stories, or not. You can put your attention somewhere else. Put simply, a thought may arise from the unconscious, which then can be analysed by the conscious, whilst the observer can silently watch everything just going on in the background. So an interesting question to ask yourself is, do I currently identify with my sense of I as my conscious thinking intellectual brain? Or do I see myself as a single point of immortal, energetic, conscious awareness that observes both the conscious and the unconscious aspects of my brain, utilizing them and influencing them when appropriate, and ignoring them when not? Now, I know I've said this before, but when we get this deep into the course, we really have to be able to get this separation. Can you consciously learn to live from this rider of the horse perspective, knowing that your animal horsey will just keep on doing the same old stuff unless you consciously retrain it towards your new desires? Do you remember from video 2 and from my last video, 53, which I called The Game of Life, where I said that there is very little in life that we can always control? Sure, we can influence things, but there's very little we can always consciously control. If a co-worker shouts at you, you can't stop that. If a friend cancels their plans, you can't force them to attend. The weather might ruin your picnic, a power outage, Wi-Fi goes down. It's all out of your control. And while you can influence these situations to some degree, to some magnitude, to mitigate against them by being prepared or putting yourself in new situations, it's still nearly impossible to control all of the outcomes of your actions. Remember, taking action will cause something to happen in your outer reality, but thinking remains in your inner reality and is only a virtual reality story, which often causes more doubt, frustration, and procrastination. Which is why my mantra of who do you wish to become and what do you desire to do with your life is so empowering and gives you a decision-making framework outside of your body's current thoughts and outside of your body's current feelings. Decision-making then becomes a process rather than an emotionally fueled drama. Now, for those of you who are truly serious about making a change, the next step is to adopt a proactive mindset. And this means taking prompt action. It means stopping making excuses. It means letting go of victim stories. And it means fully embracing your responsibility for your commitment to change. Yeah? And I think there has to come a time when you acknowledge that you alone are responsible for the quality of your inner reality experience of life, nobody else. And if you're not prepared to take this important step, I think you may have to ask yourself, how serious am I about wanting to change? I think to really grasp the magnitude of what I'm proposing, we have to zoom out, okay? And we have to look at the big picture of your life. You live in a world where you have an inner subjective reality and an outer objective reality. Yes, we live in two worlds, okay? And I'm proposing to you that from a calmness perspective, the most adaptable reality is your inner reality's subjective experience of that outer reality objective happenings, okay? Did my mind and my body like what's happening out there, or did my mind and my body not like what's happening out there? Therefore, it's through changing how your inner reality interprets those outer reality happenings that you can foster a more pleasant internal reality and more pleasant internal stories and more pleasant internal feelings. Which, to put it another way, is, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Do you want to do what family, culture, society, media, governments and marketers say is right? Or do you desire to do what is right for you, whatever that is? What conscious attitude and what positive narrative can I create in my head to promote a nicer inner experience regardless of its truth. And also this narrative will also more favorably influence the chemicals that get released into your bloodstream as your body responds to your current inner mindset, which in turn will affect your mood and your energy levels. I would say essentially it's a form of considerate self-placebo that encourages your body to adopt a more positive state, as we've discussed extensively in this course. And if you've been following closely, I hope you're beginning to realize that it's possible to function and it's possible to make decisions with minimal thinking. Yeah? And maybe you just might have an addiction to thinking. Yeah? Therefore, by believing that you can think your way out of problems, I think that is where more problems occur and it causes more troubles in our life. Can I give you an example? Dogs and cats get on just fine with life without too much thinking. Right? They just seem to be happy. And all through this course, I've been using the phrase that evolutionarily speaking, we are emotional creatures who learn to think. And those with anxiety are acting like thinking creatures who are trying to control their emotions, which, as I keep saying to you, is just the wrong way round for how we were designed to operate. Well, now you've come this far and you're still with me, I'd like to update that phrase. And I'd like to update it to, we are now knowing creatures who learn to think. And what I mean by that is, beneath all of our thoughts lies an innate energetic field of knowingness. Right? And I believe this awareness exists in every mammal, guiding them in their choices about what to eat, where to go, and what's right for them in any particular moment. For example, if a dog sniffs a little bit of food and he doesn't like it, you can't force him to eat it. He just doesn't think about it. He just instinctively knows to reject it. Now, we might refer to this as intuition, we might call it a gut feeling, or we might simply call it nature communicating with its occupants through an invisible field of energy that we all inhabit. And though our 5 primary senses may not be finely tuned into this life force, okay, it doesn't mean that it's not present. And I think this is how mammals make decisions. They sense the field of energy of the things within their proximity, which then registers as an inner knowingness of what is good for them or what is bad for them. No mental analysis is required. No rules need to be followed. No justifications are required. They have no guilt for acting this way or that way. No thinking is required. In all these mammals, it's just a knowingness, a non-verbal sense of the right thing to do for their own survival, happiness, comfort and well-being. Things like rules, boundaries, schedules, sentimentality, guilt, shame, blame, embarrassment. These are not real things. These are words and labels describing a set of actions and their resulting emotions. These are human constructs. They're programmed into us and they're not real. They're real in as much as we have these feelings and we act those ways. But that is just a label of the thoughts and the actions, okay? And they cause us discomfort. And I don't think any other mammal would or could even consider any of those actions. What does a mammal know about guilt? What does a mammal know about shame? They only have those things if a human has made them feel guilty and projected all of their programs onto them. So this is what I'm asking. Do you currently identify with your thinkingness, or would you like to begin to identify with the knowingness that resides beneath your overly conditioned 5 senses and your heavily conditioned brain? Personally, as the observer, from my soul's perspective, the rider of my horse, I don't listen to my horse's thoughts anymore, hardly at all. I certainly don't believe what my brain tells me, okay? They are just the chitter-chatter of my unconscious programmed brain, which I know to be fallible, trickable, and often erroneous, as well as brilliant and creative. I take the good bits and I ignore all the horrible stuff. These days, and we've talked about this before, I don't really care if my body is nervous or tired. I still do what I consciously desire to do towards my intentions of who I wish to be and what I desire to do with my life, regardless of any unconscious fear, any inner self-sabotage, or any negative unrequested internal dialogue. I consciously and optimistically talk myself into doing what is good for me with a positive, conscious narrative, regardless of its truth in any moment. Like you might with a small child. You'll say to them, you can do this. This will be fun. It's good to try new things. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work out. It's the experience that's important. I'll give you another example. Today, unconsciously, I didn't really want to write and film this video. However, I consciously talked myself into doing it, and I ignored the fact that my body had no motivation towards it, because ultimately, it was in my best interest to get on with it outside of my brain's thoughts and my body's indifferent feelings. Okay? What does my little animal know about the desires for my life? My little animal just automatically and unconsciously defaults to seeking comfort, avoiding conflict, and looking for some sort of easy existence. However, to me, it's through overcoming challenges, it's through taking action, it's through growing, it's through connecting with others, and it's through creating that I've learnt new skills which have revealed to me deeply satisfying new emotions like purpose and meaning. Like I've said before, waiting for motivation is a trap, because once I got into the writing, it sort of became natural and to some extent enjoyable. However, the real satisfaction comes once the video's finished, where I've created something out of nothing, yeah, that will potentially improve my or somebody else's life. Now, it took me a long time to be able to do this. And the key piece of knowledge that allowed me to make that shift was the realization that though almost everything is uncontrollable, there was one aspect of my life that I could consciously control. And that was which conscious mindset to hold in my conscious awareness in any moment, regardless of what my unconscious brain and regardless of what my body was proposing to me. Anxiety and stress are fueled by unconscious thought patterns, ruminations, catastrophizing, and resistance to uncertainty. But if you can develop the skill to cultivate new, optimistic, and positive conscious attitudes, it creates space between this new you and all of your old stories of yourself and of the world. Instead of being consumed by worry, you can observe your thoughts and emotions from a place of detachment and curiosity, or from my favorite technique, which is just ignoring them and letting them go, much as you would a noisy air conditioner in a bedroom. Are you focusing on the noise, or are you focusing your conscious awareness on calmness and sleep? To me, so much of psychology today is about analysing thoughts and feelings, when I think it's the thoughts and feelings that are causing all the problems, when they are the focus of the person's internal dialogue and their attention. They're just going cycling around looking for answers, when actually all you've got to do is something different. Surely it's by rising above your brain's thoughts and stories that calmness and more choice might be found. So this video, it explores the concept of conscious attitudes, which to me refers to the ability to deliberately select the mindset you want to adopt in every given moment. And this practice, it encourages you to respond to situations with conscious intentionality and positivity even when your unconscious mind or your physical sensations may suggest a different reaction. I know this is a simple example, but it's a good one. You've been stuck in a traffic jam. You're on the motorway, the lanes are closed, you're just sitting there. And in this scenario, you have the opportunity to choose consciously an attitude of patience or tolerance. Or you might consciously choose to redirect your anger and frustration and to use it effectively to do something else rather than sitting there stewing in your own juices. I think choosing any of these other mindsets that are more positive, it doesn't negate the fact that of the situation. Yeah, you're stuck in the traffic, you might be bored, you might be cold, it's dull, it's frustrating, it may cause you to run late. But if you can actually take a more conscious attitude and a more conscious inner narrative, okay, instead of letting the frustration dictate your feelings and reactions, you are deciding how you're going to feel and react in those moments. And I'd like to suggest that you fill your head with a nicer story, because whatever story you run will become your inner emotional experience of that moment, regardless of what's happening externally around you. I know this is so simple that it's untrue, but for some reason, people resist thinking positively. Maybe use the time to listen to a podcast, call a friend, sit silently, reflect on your day, enjoy the beauty of the countryside around you. I don't know. You've got to find your own way of doing these things. By consciously shaping your attitude, you take charge of your inner reality, which is often the only aspect of the situation that you can influence. When doubts or frustrations arise, remind yourself of your chosen attitude and return to it like an actor switching back into character. And to me, this is the art of consciously dreaming a new dream, where in your inner reality, your conscious internal dialogue is on your side and it knows who you are. It knows who you're trying to be and it knows what you desire to do. Therefore, it says things like, oh, I think I'll let that go now. Or it'll say things like, that's not my problem, NMP. Or it might say, it might say, you are consciously saying this to yourself, I'll give that a try. This looks interesting. Yeah. What action could I take right now to move myself forward? How might I stop distracting myself from taking action? How can I ask for help? How can I make this happen sooner? Yeah. Who might help me or fund me to turn my dream into a reality? You might say, let me switch to a settler attitude as I'm too tired to try and control everything. Let me switch to a nomad attitude as I need to have some fun and blow off some steam. Or I'll switch to a warrior conscious attitude because I dominantly need to get something done. I hope you can get the picture here. It's about consciously making your head a nicer and more functional place. Yes, it's going to feel a bit awkward being nice to yourself for a while, but quite quickly you realize how stupid it was to have been horrible to yourself in the first place, and how crazy it is to not be asking for what you desire from the fear of upsetting anybody around you. Now, obviously, I don't know how your brain operates, so all I can do is tell you what I do in my head to apply conscious attitudes to my life, and you'll need to experiment to find out what works for you. For me, it's these days relatively simple. I consciously talk to myself using my inner voice, my silent inner voice, or sometimes out loud with my speaking voice, and I adopt a slow, polite and loving tone, guiding myself with the attitudes and the stories I want to embrace. As I said earlier, it's almost as if I was speaking to my own child who was around 8 years old. And I express thoughts such as, John, you can do this. This will be fun. What a great day. I love this weather. If I'm late, I'm late. I'll say to myself, what else can I try? It's actually quite simple. It's ridiculously simple. And it sometimes shocks me how resistant people are to trying something that's so simple. When I learned to accept my thoughts and emotions instead of resisting, suppressing, or analyzing them, I found that this alleviated most of my inner conflicts and anxiety. You can consciously accept that you are late. You can accept that you've lost your wallet. You can accept that you've broken the very thing that you were trying to fix. Because the truth is, in that particular moment, that is what has happened. Therefore, to consciously accept deeply, then consciously pick the new appropriate new attitude for that moment, like one of action, or to lovingly laugh at yourself, can be very powerful and very, very effective. You don't need to run and rerun negative stories of that horrible event. You can let that moment go, and you can stop using it to get pity or attention from others when you tell them what happened, or you run that horrible story in your head to get your own pity or pain from it. It's like your ego is trying to feed from the emotions of receiving external praise for doing well, or from the negative emotions of fear, victimhood, failure, and guilt. I formed a conscious attitude to starve my parasitic ego of its emotional fuel by not believing its stories and by implanting new, more positive ones. Yes, it kicked and screamed for a while, but so what? That's not my problem. NMP. I try to only share positive stories with my friends, and I avoid talking about negative experiences or complaining. Instead, I like to turn my mistakes into funny anecdotes or funny stories of what silly things my animal did this week, and tell them about what the great things that it did too. And this mindset of acceptance builds emotional resilience. And it begins the task of engineering your emotions to be driven by an intentional mindset rather than from your external circumstances or your unconscious circumstances. And it's my experience that you can retrain yourself to switch to a new conscious attitude in a split second, simply, okay, and consciously, by saying things like, I will accept this. I can let that go now. I will do this. I will fix this. I'll consciously switch to an optimistic story. One of my favorites, I will choose to be happy. A good friend of mine suggested that it's like letting someone live with you that you initially didn't want, like an unwanted roommate. But you've realized that your growth, recovery, and transformation can only happen when you accept that roommate. So you give up on the fantasy of having the room all to yourself. It's like being split, and there's another voice inside you that will always say the opposite of what you desire. And that's fine. And over time, it sort of fades away by you not being energized by your conscious awareness, which is now running a new, more likable story. I like that analogy. Now, replacing an unconscious attitude requires repetition, and it requires the practical application. You must consciously choose calmness over drama, choose self-compassion over self-criticism, action over hesitation, until these responses form new neural pathways in your brain, thus updating the old routines. And as I pulled myself out of my anxiety and depression, there were a few conscious attitudes that made a massive difference to me. Firstly, I realized that there was no such thing as perfection. And often, even a job done quickly is better than not being done at all. But initially, I struggled because my unconscious insisted that I couldn't start without seeing the end, or I couldn't start unless I had all the necessary skills. However, I learned that it was more about taking action, learning by doing, and understanding that while outcomes were often beyond my control, my inputs, they definitely were within my control. Looking back, it's pretty funny. Every person in the world, every tradesman, every mother, every author, singer, dancer, every child started off knowing nothing. They tried something, they failed, they learned and tried again and again and again until they became good. Failing is how we learn. It's ERP, exposure to what you wish to do or learn, and preventing the responses of your brain and body from stopping you from trying until you become better and more valuable to yourself and the world around you. However, somehow as a child, I had learned to try and avoid failure, and I had become an unconscious I had an unconscious program that would just fire off anytime I had to do something new, causing me fear and intense anxiety and the need to sort of distract myself and pull it away unless I could be perfect at something. And it just caused me fear, pain, and a lot of procrastination. These days, I don't call it failing anymore. I consciously call it learning, experimenting, practicing, growing, or more importantly, becoming of more value to myself. I have the conscious attitude that even if I mess up, I won't judge or reject myself. And even as others judge me, that's their problem, not my problem. And I've certainly not consciously judge or berate myself. I've found that to be very, very empowering. It makes my inner reality a nicer place to be, regardless of what's happening in my outer reality, or even regardless of what my old unconscious programs are trying to tell me, because I'm not that interested in it anymore. Now, the next conscious attitude I began to adopt was simply to say yes to life. If a friend said to me, oh, let's go and do X, Y, Z, I'd say yeah, regardless of whether I liked that activity, regardless if I had any skills in that direction, I would just say yes and go along. I'd go along to have the experience and to reprogram my unconscious to be okay with not knowing what will happen and to be able to accept the vulnerability of being a novice and to embrace the challenge of learning something new. This is a really good mindset to adopt. Most of my course is about me telling stories. And most of these stories that I'm telling you can come from all the hundreds of adventures, all the different jobs I've had, all the interesting relationships I've had that have left me with a rich database of stories of what worked, what failed, and what surprised me. Right? And the ability to tell those stories has increased my ability to be more interesting in social situations, which means my social anxiety backs off because I can just do it now. Can you see it's just a process? Those who play the game of life like a process will nearly always outperform those who live life emotionally through worry, delay, avoiding, or needing to be perfect. Just nobody has taught you this until now. It's just a process. Now, the third conscious attitude I developed was the conscious desire to expand my personality so my experience of life could be richer. As I've said before, though an introvert, how might I learn to act in more extroverted ways? Though conditioned as a pessimist in childhood, how could I consciously develop more optimism? Yeah? Though hating small talk, how could I learn to be a master of it? Yeah? And though hating to be the center of attention, how might I learn to present or take ownership of a situation and ask for what I need? These days, it makes me so sad when a person says, oh, well, I was just born that way, so there's not much I can do about it. It makes me just want to shake them and say, you're so wrong. There is so much you can do. However, as we know, you can only help others to the degree that they wish to help themselves. So very often, I have to drop my unconscious need to help them and then consciously just run a silent little prayer in my head saying, I'm here for you if you need me. And though awkward in the beginning, it soon became fun, a fun game to try to make my inner reality as nice as possible, regardless of what was happening to me, around me, or within me. I still have lots of unconscious stupid thoughts, okay? I still have lots of beat myself up stories in my head, but these days they just make me smile because I don't believe them, but they do remind me of how far I've come. Now, the last attitude, and probably the most profound, was to adopt new conscious attitudes towards gratitude and happiness. Now, initially, I really struggled with practicing having gratitude for what I did have, rather than thinking, worrying and complaining about what I didn't have or what I thought my life lacked. I don't know why this was so difficult for me, but it really, really was, certainly in the beginning. Perhaps it was because I had spent so much time around negative or anxious people that I had become conditioned to believe that concepts like fairness and equality were real, which they're not, and conditioned to think there was a right way to do something when there isn't. You know, the truth is I could do whatever I wanted as long as I was okay with the consequences of my actions. And one positive attitude I developed was to start asking for what I wanted or what I desired in each moment. And since I no longer needed external validation, because I was internally validating myself, it didn't matter what the other person said. They said yes, or they could say no. I didn't mind, okay? But very often they said yes, right? Which gives a lot more credence to the old saying, if you don't ask, you don't get. It has absolutely shocked me. It's incredible how much you can get if you ask nicely, if you smile, and you bring some optimism to the table. I was also shocked at how an inner story of gratitude could be so life-changing, though in the beginning I really encountered a lot of resistance from my old fearful victim mindset. These days, I'm grateful that I had OCD, as without it I would never have grown so much. I'm grateful that I had depression, so I can now know what not having depression feels like. My observer awareness is grateful for the body that it parasitically rides upon, regardless of its size, pain, looks, age, sex or weight. I can be grateful for the challenges in my life that force me to step up and learn new things. I'm grateful to the people who in my life have taught me love, tolerance and patience. I'm grateful for my creative imagination. And so it goes on. I'm probably not the best person to teach you gratefulness because it's such a personal thing. But there are many, many YouTubers out there who are making videos on gratitude and gratitude diaries and all that kind of like. I'd say go and check it out. All I can say is gratitude was a game changer for me. And shocking that such a simple perspective could make such a big difference to my inner reality and my subsequent moods. These days I take a few moments when I wake up and last thing at night before I go to sleep to just feel grateful for the people and the things in my life. There's always, and it's a technique you'll have to learn, but there is always a way to put a positive spin on almost any person or any situation. Now, another simple yet shockingly powerful realization I had was that happiness can be a conscious choice. You can choose to smile. You can choose to act in happy ways. You can choose to talk in optimistic and positive manners. Okay? You can choose to adopt a light-hearted perspective. And in doing these things, you will feel a lot better than if you were grouching around moaning about everything. I used to look at happy people and I either envied them for naturally being so happy, or I negated them by thinking, well, how can you be so happy when ABC is happening in the world? I now recognize that adopting a conscious attitude of thinking and acting positively, it's a superpower. Not only does it make me feel better by releasing beneficial chemicals into my bloodstream, but it also positively impacts the people around me. As I've said in so many videos, I strive not to complain or moan. Instead, I try to see the best in others, and I try to maintain an optimistic outlook on my life, no matter how much my unconscious or others may attempt to drag me down. I make the conscious choice and the conscious effort to pick myself up. I really wish somebody had taught me these simple techniques when I was a child. I think I would have saved 20 years of worry and anxiety. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, learning how to consciously not be horrible to myself via my inner dialogue is one of the most sensible strategies I ever adopted, even if I had to lovingly fib a little bit. So when brushing my teeth and staring into the bathroom mirror, my unconscious might say, "Blimey, John, you're getting old." But my conscious choice would be to reply, "No, these are the best years of my life and I look great." How can you learn to be nice to yourself consciously? Now, I would suggest that you don't tell big lies, but small optimistic fibs are fine because the body seems to respond to what you hold in mind. I wouldn't say to myself, "Wow, John, what a great head of hair you have." But I can consciously say, well, bald can be sexy. Lots of women like a shaved head. I'm so grateful to have a nice shaped head. Right? I think many anxious people or people with low self-esteem were never taught how to be nice to themselves in their inner reality, regardless of any truth in their outer reality. So, as I close this video, let me finish with two more observations. Firstly, as you change, you may encounter resistance, particularly from close family members who themselves have anxiety or depression or low self-esteem, and they may express their concerns in ways like this. They might say, "Well, what do you have to be happy about?" Or they might say, "Well, if you cared about this, then you'd be as worried as I am." Yeah? Or, "How can you be so optimistic when so many bad things are happening?" Or they might say something like, "Oh, you can't just change your job or move to a new area. What about all your responsibilities?" Or they'll just shoot things down and say, "Don't be silly, that will never work." Right? It can be really surprising to realize that family and friends may inadvertently try to sabotage your progress. I think this stems from their fear of losing you or breaking a codependency or witnessing your transformation, which may deeply challenge their own limiting belief systems. And I've also noticed that many people struggle with guilt when they selfishly decide to pursue their own dreams rather than conforming to old family or cultural expectations. There seems to be an old story inside that says being selfish or putting yourself first is wrong or indulgent. But how can your happiness, how can putting yourself first be wrong for you? Because you are the center of your attention. Now, these family dynamics, they may amplify this guilt. Families often operate within established roles and established expectations, which can unconsciously pull individuals back into those old patterns. And when someone begins making choices that align with their authentic self, okay, rather than family expectations, relatives may react with disappointment, confusion, or resistance, further intensifying that person's feelings of guilt or shame or self-doubt. However, by consciously examining these feelings, you can begin to distinguish between your authentic needs and the obligations imposed by outdated or external family or religious patterns. Remember, as I said in video 51, it takes two parties for the contract of guilt to be in operation. The person who's applying the guilt and the person choosing to receive that guilt. And as that person raises in self-esteem, it's hard for somebody to guilt you if you're not prepared to accept their story anymore. If you haven't seen that, it's worth going back. Video 51 where I talk about guilt. And if you are guilting yourself, it means your unconscious brain is trying to guilt your conscious brain. And this is why we side with the conscious attitude of who you would like to become and what you would like to do, okay? And recognize that self-guilt is purely the naivety of you consciously believing your old unconscious stories, and therefore it's self-abuse, okay? And that can now be stopped with this new conscious awareness. And my final observation, assuming that you want calmness, and assuming that you want action, purpose, and meaning in your life, is whilst calmness is important, it should be coupled with action to create meaningful change. How can I explain that? A person who achieves inner peace but remains stagnant may feel unfulfilled. And on the other side, action without calmness can lead to burnout, impulsivity, and inefficiency. Hope you can see what I'm talking about there. Okay, once again, there's a lot to take in. But actually, the message is unbelievably simple. You can consciously make your inner reality more pleasant if you wish. Yeah? And conscious awareness is one of the few things that you can consciously control all the time that you're staying conscious. And the more you learn to control it, the easier it becomes to do. And ultimately, it's the most natural thing to do. Okay, then. In upcoming videos, I'm going to teach you some of my favorite techniques for further changing unconscious belief systems. Until then, let's get on with focusing our conscious development of more positive attitudes to make your inner reality as pleasant as you can. And that inner reality pleasantness will be the experience of your life no matter what's happening out there. Thanks for watching, and I'll get working on the next video. Thank you.